carry out his plan, primitive man needed Sandy the time camel and the Kama llama. What do you think, fellas? You'll be part of history.
You want to be part of history, cousin? Sure, why not?
So, they agreed to be part of the plan. But what was the plan? Well, the idea was to put Sandy on the west bank and the Kama llama in the middle, right next to the tree, a distance of about 50 miles. Then primitive man, with his timing jar, would get on Sandy the time camel, wait till noon, and then start moving toward the east bank. Now, while he was doing this, primitive man would turn the timing jar over and over. The sun traveled a lot faster than Sandy, but that didn't matter for primitive man's plan. He kept traveling, turning over the glass until he got to the original tree. That turned out to take about 100 turns. Now, Sandy was exhausted, so he quickly changed to the Kama llama and continued his journey. He also continued to turn the timing jar over and over as they proceeded to the east bank. Now, by the time they got there, the Kama llama was also completely exhausted. After all, he had also traveled 50 miles, and it had also taken him 100 turns. Primitive man, too, was tired. After all, it had taken him 200 turns to get to this point. But now he was all ready for the clever part of his plan. He continued turning the glass over until he had done that 50 times, which meant that it had been 250 times since he had started his journey from the West Bank. 250 times, the same amount of time it takes the sun to go completely around the Earth. That means that at that moment, the sun was arriving at the West Bank and it was noon, which is exactly what he wanted. He wanted to be standing on the East Bank when it was noon on the West Bank. And now all he had to do was measure the time it took for the sun to go from the West to the East Bank. And it so happened that that was just one glass time. One glass time corresponded to 100 miles, which meant he could measure the distance around the Earth, which was one glass time times 250. And one glass time is 100 miles. Now we know how to do this multiplication. So the distance around the Earth is 25,000 miles. And primitive man had done what he set out to do. Well, primitive man was very pleased with his experiment. Sandy the time camel and the Kama llama, not so much.
What do you think of being part of history, cousin? Next time, let him get an elephant to do all that walking.
Okay, let's close this volume and get back to multiplication.